Hello, this is David Lindsley. This video is a continuation of my earlier presentation of where the Nephites lived. Here I want to add more information which has been significant to me. In my previous video, I presented testimonies from Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, Joseph Fielding Smith, and others who testify that the Book of Mormon took place in America. We talked about the thousands of documented Indian burial mounds throughout the eastern half of the United States, as shown in this 1894 map. These mounds were not created by current indigenous tribes, but by peoples that long predated them. This culture, nicknamed by archaeologists as the Hopewell, has as its earliest dating of 550 BC in the Florida region. The dating shows they migrated from the southeast northward and then eastward with a final carbon dating of 400 AD. The timeline and directions match the Book of Mormon record. We looked at possible areas of Nephite migration from their landing in the Florida area to their final battle in upstate New York near the hill Cumorah. As published in the Ensign, Hugh Nibley, renowned church scholar, linguist, and historian, said this: "A closer approximation to the Book of Mormon picture of Nephite culture is seen in the earth and palisade structures of the Hopewell and Adena culture areas than in the later stately piles of stone in Mesoamerica. In other words, we should look to the Hopewell mound builder culture of North America as a good match for the Nephite civilization." We talked about the Smithsonian surveys that documented hundreds of the mounds built in Midwest and Eastern North America. The surveys clearly documented the many examples of a ditch and wall combination found throughout the Ohio Valley. The ditch and wall combinations were introduced by Captain Moroni in the Book of Mormon and used extensively to defend their cities from their enemies. We presented testimonies from Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, Mark E. Peterson, and Marion G. Romney that the location of the one and only hill Cumorah is in upstate New York. We also talked about the thousands of slate, clay, and copper artifacts found in the Michigan area. And we summarized the descriptions of the land of promise as given in the Book of Mormon: a choice land, a land of liberty, a land where no king shall rule over it, the land where the New Jerusalem will be built, the land where a mighty Gentile nation will exist, and the land where the Lamanites are scattered by the Gentiles. So let's move on to new information. In this video, I'll quickly talk about additional evidences that fit a Book of Mormon setting in North America. Seas. What are the seas mentioned in the Book of Mormon? How big does a body of water need to be called a sea? Here is the Sea of Galilee in Israel, also the Dead Sea, and the Salton Sea in California. With all three of these seas, the land on the other shore is quite visible. Going back to early church leaders, did anyone say where the seas of the Book of Mormon are located? Yes, Joseph did. Here is a quote about the warrior Zelph again, and this time, let's look at what Joseph said about a sea. His name was Zelph. He was a warrior and chieftain under the great prophet Onondagas, who was known from the hill Cumorah, or Eastern Sea, to the Rocky Mountains. So Joseph specifically identified where the Eastern Sea of the Book of Mormon was located. Here is the hill Cumorah, and the easternmost of the Great Lakes, Lake Ontario, or Eastern Sea. Since Joseph labeled Lake Ontario as the Eastern Sea, we can identify the remaining Great Lakes with the names used in the Book of Mormon. The inset on the right shows the Sea of Galilee and Dead Sea at the same exact scale as a larger map. Notice how small the seas are compared to the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes are far larger than the seas of the Holy Land and could easily have been called seas. Here's Lake Ontario. We don't see hills on the opposite shore because the lake is so large, and there are rolling waves like an ocean. Here is Lake Michigan. Beautiful and very large. Again, no visible land on the opposite side. Does the Book of Mormon use the word lake anywhere? Yes. There are several times the word lake is used, and each time it's referring to the symbolic lake of fire. For instance, in 2 Nephi, "For he delivereth his saints from that lake of fire and brimstone, which is endless torment." Everywhere else in the Book of Mormon, the word sea is used. What do they call an ocean? Many waters. There are 7 references in the Book of Mormon that refer to the narrow pass, or passage, or neck. Let's look at where this narrow place could have been located. This is a close-up of the southern end of Michigan as it is today, with Lake Michigan on the left and Lake Erie on the right. This overlay shows the Great Black Swamp, which was an extension of Lake Erie that existed until the 19th century. The swamp stretched the shoreline of Lake Erie westward, as far west as present-day Fort Wayne, Indiana. 2,000 years ago, the area of the Great Black Swamp may have been a deeper lake. Either as a swamp or deeper lake, these watery areas would have been a natural barrier to settlements and travel. With expanded water areas, the southern portion of Michigan narrowed considerably. Let's take a closer look. This map shows the current topography of southern Michigan and the distance between the Great Lakes. Much of the land there is very flat and just a few feet above the current water level of the surrounding lakes. The arrows show the present-day width of southern Michigan. The red dots are the mounds published on the 1894 survey that show where ancient settlements existed. Here is a line that follows around the lowest land areas and significantly in between the mounds. There are clearly areas which lack any mounds or settlements. Researchers say that 2,000 years ago, the water levels in the Great Lakes were higher than they are today. This map shows the water level raised to fill in those lowest areas where the mounds are absent. See how narrow the southern edge of Michigan becomes. Travel between these wet and low-lying areas would have been on the higher ridges of land, including this narrow land feature. Here are the 7 references in the Book of Mormon to the narrow pass in chronological order, beginning with the Jaredites. In Ether, we read, "And they, Jaredites, built a great city by the narrow neck of land, by the place where the sea divides the land." The narrow neck is where the sea divides the land. In Alma, there being a small neck of land between the land northward and the land southward. So neck describes the small piece of land between the seas. In Alma 50:34 we read, "By the narrow pass which led by the sea into the land northward, yea, by the sea, on the west and on the east." The narrow pass leads into the land northward and has water on the west and on the east of the pass. In Alma 52 we read, "He should fortify the land bountiful and secure the narrow pass which led into the land northward." The land bountiful was south of the narrow pass which led into the land northward. The land bountiful is therefore in the land southward. Alma 63, "And it came to pass that Hagoth built him an exceedingly large ship on the borders of the land bountiful, by the land desolation, and launched it forth into the west sea, by the narrow neck which led into the land northward." The West Sea is located close to the narrow neck which led into the land northward. The land bountiful was next to the land desolation. "And the Lamanites did give unto us the land northward, yea, even to the narrow passage which led into the land southward. and we did give unto the Lamanites all the land southward. From the north, the narrow passage leads into the land southward. And it came to pass that I did cause my people that they should gather themselves together at the land desolation, to a city which was in the borders by the narrow pass which led into the land southward. The city is within the borders of the land desolation by the narrow pass. All 7 of these references to the narrow pass, neck, passage point to the same geographical feature. It's the one path to travel either direction between the land southward and the land northward. Let's briefly look at references to seasons, such as the phrases driven snow, heat of the day, and whirlwinds. Different seasons imply locations many hundreds miles away from the equator. Near the equator, the temperatures are nearly constant, and there really is only one season. One of the references to seasons in this passage, which shows that Nephite agriculture had seasons for planting and harvesting. For the earth was smitten that it was dry, and did not yield forth grain in the season of grain. It appears that ripe grain was available only at a specific season, not year-round. From several passages of scriptures, we learn that the Nephites were familiar with seasonal temperature changes. In 1 Nephi, and the whiteness thereof did exceed the whiteness of the driven snow. Nephi likens a whiteness to the driven snow, which implies more than a little dusting. He wrote this on the small plates he made after living in the Promised Land for several decades. He was familiar with many years of weather changes. Alma 51. Sleep had overpowered them because of their much fatigue, which was caused by the labors and heat of the day. The specific mention of heat of the day used here seems to indicate that this period of warfare was different than other times when high heat was not mentioned. This implies seasonal temperature changes. Alma 46. And there were some who died with fevers, which at some seasons of the year were very frequent in the land. This verse tells us 2 things relevant to seasons. 1, that the land experienced seasons, and 2, that illnesses were more common at certain times of the year. The majority of North America experiences 4 seasons. Central America, being close to the equator, has only 1, summer, all year round. The specific mention of fevers could be a reference to malaria, which is carried and spread by mosquitoes in warm weather. When we think of a region with malaria, we don't usually think of North America, but malaria was common in the United States until 1951. Remember that the early saints who settled Nauvoo were initially infected with malaria from mosquitoes in the swampy land. This map from 1870 shows the severity of malaria cases across the United States. Therefore, having seasons with fevers fits the health history of North America. Closer to the equator, the risk of malaria is year-round. The next scripture mentions several extreme weather and geologic events, most of which are common all over the world. Whirlwinds or tornadoes, however, are more localized to specific regions. 3 Nephi 8:12 reads, But behold, there was a more great and terrible destruction in the land northward. For behold, the whole face of the land was changed because of the tempest and the whirlwinds, and the thunderings and the lightnings, and the exceedingly great quaking of the whole earth. Here is a map showing the potential for tornadoes in the United States. The Mississippi and Ohio valleys are referred to as Tornado Alley. This map shows historical frequency of tornadoes throughout the world. Notice the extremely high concentration in the eastern half of the United States. There is an absence of tornadoes in Central America. Let's look briefly at the style of buildings mentioned in the Book of Mormon. and considered whether or not we might find remnants today. Hugh Nibley traveled the world and personally inspected temples in Egypt, Central America, and studied the Middle East. Concerning remnants of the Book of Mormon, he wrote, "Blinded by the gold of pharaohs and the mighty ruins of Babylon, Book of Mormon students have declared themselves not interested in the drab and commonplace remains of our lowly Indians. But in all the Book of Mormon we look in vain for anything that promises majestic ruins." In other words, there is nothing in the Book of Mormon that says they built huge and majestic buildings. But rather, they built them from timbers, as taught by Nephi. 2 Nephi, "And I did teach my people to build buildings and to work in all manner of wood." Helaman 3, verses 9 and 11, "That in time they might have timber to build their houses, yea, their cities and their temples and their synagogues and their sanctuaries and all manner of their buildings. And thus they did enable the people to land northward, that they might build many cities, both of wood and of cement." Notice they built cities of wood and cement. There is no mention of stone. To me, the real proof of where the Nephites lived is not in the small details and physical evidences, but in the testimonies borne by great men such as Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, and others who have testified over the years that the Book of Mormon occurred in North America. I presented here just a taste of the enormous evidence that supports our prophets and scholars for a North American setting to the Book of Mormon. There are countless books, articles, and videos that give much more information than I can share. I recommend as a starting point, you consider Wayne May's new magazine series called Land of Promise, Uncovering Ancient America. In each issue are dozens of articles by prominent authors and researchers such as Wayne May, Bruce Porter, Jonathan Neville, David Hawking, Kevin Price, and many others. The Nephites lived where? Here. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the information and material presented.